Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on AI and the data security risk. My name is Paul Conaty with CWSI, and myself and my guest, Brenda, Pessoa from Microsoft, will be talking to you today on this, I think, very interesting topic based on the amount of interest we've had in people signing up for the webinar. So I'm just going to start with a quick set of introductions. So Brenda, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I'm Brenda Pessoa. I am a security, compliance, and identity specialist in Microsoft, actually a technical specialist. I've been in Microsoft over 7 years and focus on the security, compliance, and identity part of the business with Microsoft 365. And I help customers to understand how we can address their needs using the Microsoft tools. So it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Brenda. I'm delighted to have you here this morning. My name is Paul Conaty. I'm Client Solutions Director with CWSI. I specialize in the area of GRC, governance, risk and compliance. So I work a lot with clients at a strategic level around their data security and data compliance requirements, with a specific focus in the Microsoft Purview and E5 stack. Perfect. And what would we like to talk to you about today? So here's a kind of a rough agenda of what we're going to go through. Before I go through this, I would like to say to everybody, there is an opportunity to ask questions throughout. Please put them into the chat in the GoToWebinar, and we can address them as we go. We will also have some time, hopefully, at the end for some questions if they don't get asked during the session. But really, we love to get interesting questions when we do these kind of webinars. So please do. There are no bad questions. Throw anything that comes into your mind into the chat as we go. So what we're going to start with is a quick intro to CWSI, in case there's anybody online who hasn't heard of us as an organization. Then we're going to speak at a high level around what is generative AI, or Gen AI or LLMs, or all these different terms that are out there. Then we're going to dive down to a more specific introduction to what Copilot is and how Copilot works. And then under the hood, how does Copilot actually use your data? And what are the kind of risks and challenges around Gen AI in general, and also in Copilot specifically? Then we'll talk about some recommendations around how you can put some controls in place to safely use tools like Copilot and Gen AI in your organization. And then we'll leave you with a couple of key takeaways that we hope you would find useful taking away from today, and a little bit around, how CWSI specifically might be able to help you address some of those recommendations or takeaways with the help of ourselves or with Microsoft. So just a quick intro into who CWSI are. So CWSI are an Irish company. We were founded in 2010. We originally specialized in the area of mobile security, which obviously was a very kind of cloud and consumer-driven security requirement compared to maybe traditional IT. And out of that, we grew into the area of managing modern endpoints, and then develop further into the areas of cloud security, particularly in our partnership with Microsoft over the last couple of years. And our purpose is to enable the world to work securely from anywhere. So, regardless, any device working on any solution anywhere in the world. We've got 4 key pillars within our organization. Obviously, in the top right is our heritage, leaders in modern endpoint security. So we started out working with partners like Mobile Iron, who became Avanti, AirWatch that became Workspace ONE, and then obviously massively with Intune in the Microsoft space. Initially on mobile, but now it's just all endpoints. There's no difference between a Windows, a Mac, a Linux, or Android or iOS. And increasingly, we're starting to see this move as well into the areas of IoT. We have a team based out of the Netherlands who specialize in secure application development, working on applications for specific use cases like, excuse me, like frontline policing, healthcare, other kind of secure requirements around app dev. And we have a team that specializes in that space, and also around customizing solutions like the Microsoft solutions to build on top of the Microsoft platforms. The area that I'm mostly working myself is in the GRC and advisory. So that's around advising organizations around security and compliance. So whether that's ISO, NIS2, data security, compliance, e-discovery, all those different kinds of areas. We have a number of different parts of that practice, with data security probably being the biggest at the moment. And then finally, cloud security. So we also have a lot of experience, and we have services in the areas of SOC, threat and vulnerability management, security threat intelligence, SIEM, etc. We, as I said, we were originally CWSI is based in Ireland. We've acquired a number of organizations over the last couple of years, so we now have a footprint across Western Europe, with offices in the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. All of the acquisitions were organizations that were generally similar to ourselves, either specializing in endpoint security or cloud security, with the Netherlands team also having that secure app development element. And we are now currently 150 staff across the 5 countries, servicing mostly Western European clients, but we also have North American and Asia Pacific multinational clients as well, particularly in the areas of international banking and aviation. So generative AI, it's everywhere at the moment in terms of discourse. It's the terms you'll hear is AI, Gen AI, LLMs, all these different kind of phrases. So what are they? What are we talking about? What is behind the buzzword? So artificial intelligence, or AI, is just a broad set of techniques used to train computers to complete tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence. For example, answering questions, generating data, recognizing objects. So, the first and most recognizable of these is probably ChatGPT, which enable people to ask, natural language questions and get very, very useful answers very, very rapidly, to generate content, to, create, to look for brainstorming ideas, to summarize documents, to potentially help generate code or scripting, all sorts of different kind of use cases. It's incredibly flexible and useful set of tools, which is the AI, artificial intelligence. And these are built on LLMs, which are large language models. So these are trained on, AI works on models trained on huge amounts of data, which allows them to do all that summarization, generalization, and categorizations. So there's LLMs and Gen AI are kind of two sides of the same coin. They're interchangeable nearly in terms of how you consider them. GPT being one of the most well-known, but there's lots of others out there. We've got Gemini with Google, we've got Copilot with Microsoft, which is built on OpenAI type models, and we have a number of other ones out there. At last count, there was several thousand different AI or LLM tools available on the internet. Brenda, I'd like to maybe invite you though, to come in here, because with the rise in AI and it being a major part of Microsoft's strategy, obviously Microsoft have had to develop some working principles, and maybe you might talk us through those.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, so at Microsoft, we are committed to creating responsible AI by design. Okay, so we believe that when you create technology that can change the world, you must also ensure that the technology is used responsibly. So the goal of Microsoft is really to develop and deploy AI that will have beneficial impact and earn trust from society. And our work is really guided by a core set of principles, which are fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. And we've built these principles directly into Copilot orchestration. So first thing that you have to know is that your data is your data and you own and control it. Microsoft does not use your data to train the LLM, okay? And your data is protected by the most comprehensive enterprise compliance and security solutions. So this last point is probably one of the most critical, which is protecting your data. So because AI is so new, we've got a lot of questions about privacy for Microsoft 365 Copilots. And there are no differences if you think about how Microsoft does between the privacy commitments for Microsoft 365 and Microsoft 365 Copilot. So we recently committed to a set of 4 core privacy principles across the company. So first one is you control your data, and we believe that your data is your business and you should control the collection, use the distribution, as well as the location of your data. You know where your data is located and how it's used. We secure your data in rest and in transit, and we defend your data. So Microsoft reviews every legal demand to ensure that's valid and only provides data pertaining to specific accounts and identifiers. So if we look at the next slide, and we look more specific to Copilot, okay? Copilot for Microsoft 365 isn't just a large language model. It combines the power of the very latest LLMs with your data in the Microsoft Graph. Okay, so this is your emails, your chats, your calendar, files, and more. And the productivity tools and apps that millions of people use every day to get things done. So this is Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, OneNote, and so on. And of course, Copilot is built on Microsoft's comprehensive approach to security, compliance, privacy, identity, and responsible AI. So the core component of the Copilot is the Microsoft Graph, which is, if you don't know, the Microsoft Graph provides a unified programmability model that accesses your data and intelligence in the Microsoft 365. So one of the ways that Copilot can access the knowledge in Graph is via the Microsoft Search, for example, which provides personalized results and insights, okay? If you ever search for an email in Outlook, or if you ever looked for a file in SharePoint, you've used the Microsoft Search. So we are constantly investing in improving Microsoft Search's ability to provide insights, ranking, and relevance across your data. And all of the improvements we are making with Microsoft Search accrue to Copilot as well. So the key is you control what users have access to in Copilot with the Microsoft Search and the access controls. And because it's built in on Microsoft Search in addition to the access controls, you can also extend the grounding data Copilot has access to via the Microsoft Graph connectors. Okay, so in summary, Copilot leverages these 3 components: Microsoft Graphs, a graph that provides the data, Microsoft Search that provides the search over this data, and also the semantic fabric, which enhances the search relevance by providing a semantic representation of the data. And these components all are used in a technique called retrieval augmented generation. So this is what Copilot does in behind the scenes to make sure that's giving you a contextualized information.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brenda. And maybe for anyone who's not been that familiar with what Copilot can do, I think you might be able to show, hopefully in the next couple of slides, a little bit of what this actually means to the end user. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect.
And I'll be true, I am a fan of Copilot, and I use on a daily basis, and it has changed my life. So with Copilot in Teams, some of the things that you can do is really summarize the key points, the key discussion points. And these include, for example, who said what and where people are aligned and where they disagree. And also suggest action items in real time during the meeting. So if you think in terms of how you want your organization to focus on what they have to get done, now they can focus on the meetings, they can contribute on a real life, in real life, and make sure that they are keeping all the tracking and notes of that meeting. And after the meeting, Copilot's available in the meetings recap tab And this will provide a summary of the discussion, and then you can ask questions, ask the next steps, and get a summary of everything that has to be done and what was agreed. Also, in Copilot for Teams chat, and also in the channels, it helps you to review the main points. It helps you to review action items and also any decisions that we're making. And you don't need to have to go through all the threads. So it can give you all the main points of that discussion and what you have missed. If we go to the next slide for Copilot in Outlook, there is a video that we will show to you, and I will just give you some insights after that, because Copilot in Outlook helps manage and triage emails, for example, more efficiently, and it offers you personalized suggestions and insights. It can help also with time management by preparing your, helping you to prepare for your meetings, summarizing the long email threads, and give you the key points. And also the feature I most like of all in Outlooks is about how Copilot can assist you drafting emails and also coaching you by offering guidance on writing better emails, and also focus on the tone of the email, on the reader's sentiment, and also in clarity. I think the video went already on, right? Or
yeah, sorry, the video ran really quickly there while we came into the slides. You need me to run it again?
If we can, yeah, just to show a little bit of what it does. You see, this is the recap tab. Okay, that's okay. So this is the recap tab, and then you have Copilot on the right side where you can ask questions, summarize the key points, and so on. So the next one would be Copilot in Word. Really nice feature. So you can create some of the drafts for your emails, summarize key points as well. And if you have long documents, you can get all the key points of that document and add information by prompting Copilot to do that in your behalf. And soon we will have the integration of Designer in Word, which will help you to easily incorporate custom graphics and also use the context of your content to propose, for example, specific graphs as well. And one more, Copilot in PowerPoint. So Copilot in PowerPoint, I love it as well. So it's really helping you to create those graphs, those PowerPoints, and helping you to bring your ideas to life. I have a very nice example that I like to give to everyone. That's where I was working on a document for a project, and I needed to create a presentation from that document. And I just asked Copilot to look at that document and create 6 slides, I would say, with the key points and next steps, and then it created. And with the design within Microsoft PowerPoint, I just need to change the design and use the suggestions to the way that I liked. So I really loved, because it was a task that would take me a long time, and I took less than 30 minutes to finish.
I think we've one more just for Excel.
Yeah, we have a video here as well. So Copilot with Excel can help you to get insights for your data, create really powerful professional visualizations in terms of how it generates the forecast of your data as well. And it enables really to analyze the data more efficiently. And soon you will see that it will be able to use Python within Excel to get also this functionality in terms of summarizing the data and so on.
I like this one because I can never remember Excel formulas when I need them. So this is one that's going to be quite handy for me.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, this is the key tools that we have within Microsoft, but you can use also on the web, you can use also in OneNote and Loop and so on. So it's really kind of integrating in many tools within Microsoft and making your life easy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brenda. I think, I'm not sure whether everyone online has played around with things like Copilot yet, but you can probably see the capabilities of it, and hence the desire why, the people in your organizations would want to deploy it. But now I suppose that we can see why it's desirable and the power of it and the potential benefits of it. What are the kind of risks and challenges that we have around generative AI? So we're going to start with a couple of risks and challenges that apply to any Gen AI, and then we'll maybe dig into more specific ones around our Copilot. But first up, I think one of the key risks that Brenda has already alluded to when she talked about the principles that Microsoft have implemented is around privacy, right? So concerns that data exposure could be exposed via training models. So, for example, and this is one I've come across a number of times in doing security reviews and risk assessments with customers, is people using, as I mentioned, there's hundreds or even thousands of these different AI tools out there at the moment. And one of the very common use cases that AI or LLMs is very good at is translation. So people are uploading documents, in one language to get it translated into another. And that's really causing some problems or potential problems, because you're uploading a document. So first of all, you're taking a copy of your document from your environment and uploading it to somewhere that may or may not be secure. That service may or may not live within the EU, for example, from a GDPR point of view, or you could have signed an NDA and you're uploading a contract, so you should be very careful doing, or should not do that sort of thing. And then the other bit is a lot of those services will use the data that gets uploaded to them to continue to train their own systems. So your data is now part of their model. So that's a risk that people should be worried about. The second one that's very common is around incorrect use of copyright or sensitive material. So often how I would describe a lot of these Gen AI tools, particularly the likes of Copilot, when you see what it could do there, is it's a very motivated, helpful intern who really wants to help you out, but doesn't know the rules of the organization. So if you're using Copilot, for example, to summarize or take data from one document and put it into another, or you're using another Gen AI tool to do something like that, out of the box, those tools typically don't understand what copyright or sensitive material is. So they could take data from sensitive locations and bring it into a file, which, if you're not very careful, could mean that you could expose that sensitive data into a file that is distributed publicly or to people who wouldn't normally have access rights to the sensitive material. So you have to be very careful around your data access controls, because otherwise you could expose IP, client data, sensitive data in the query responses or the content you generate downstream using the Gen AI tool. And this is a big concern, I think, for a lot of the tools, even in-house, where you're not maybe sending the data externally, you still have need to know within organizations. So you don't want sensitive material being exposed to people who shouldn't have access to it. Another interesting one is around the area of hallucinations. So again, these models can do some strange things. It is primary algorithmic programming is to give you the answer it thinks you wants, is my kind of limited data scientist or non-data scientist understanding of how it works. So what can happen is it can create false or inaccurate content. Like the initial examples of this that a lot of people saw were in academia, where it was creating, references to papers or documents or sources that didn't actually exist. But maybe a more critical or potentially, impactful example would be a recent case in New York, where an AI that was being used to help review, do kind of legal research, created fake case laws, cited fake case laws in a document. So it created case laws that didn't actually exist. So you can imagine, obviously, in a legal context, that's extremely dangerous. We've seen some other similar strange or potentially worrying issues in healthcare, where diagnosis, where AI can potentially be very powerful, but can also make mistakes. And obviously, when the stakes are high in areas like healthcare, that's not really acceptable. So you do have to bear in mind that the AI doesn't always get things right, and you should always consider having a oversight by a subject matter expert human before you maybe productionize the outcomes from AI queries. And then finally, we have this whole new world of prompt engineering. And basically, as Brenda was showing you there, all of the use of these tools is around prompts, natural language prompting. So you can ask it questions like in a chat, in normal language. But the power of the models also means that people, being smart, could potentially use those prompts to be able to do some outcomes that people would not particularly want to happen. So, for example, someone could manipulate prompts to bypass security controls. So going back to the accessing data they shouldn't. And there's also could be concerns there that, for example, if a user account was compromised by an attacker, typically we see attackers having to spend quite a bit of time, weeks or even months, within an environment to be able to understand and surface the data that they might want to look for before they do a theft or a ransomware attack. Using prompts, they could cut that time down significantly. So they could be using the prompts to find all sensitive data, or find all this type of data, or find all documents with passwords in them, for example, or find all certificates in the organization, etc. You can get creative yourselves. So using prompts to bypass security controls is a new risk that we haven't had to think of before by a prompt engineering. Brenda, is there anything you'd like to comment or add around any of these risks or challenges, or anything else that you've seen yourself as a kind of new concern that's come out of generative AI?
Yeah, I think the risk of data exposure is really high. And to give an example, as soon as ChatGPT was out there, I remember that there were so many cases of people in the company sharing the data and didn't know that this would be forever on the web and exposed, that it's really something that you have to think about when you are using those tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly if you're a heavy regulated entity, I think we've got to be very careful about personal data and sensitive personal data, for example, from a GDPR point of view, getting sucked into models and outputs. So yeah, it's definitely the data security piece. I think you're right, is one of the key areas that we would see concern about. So some good questions to ask before you implement a tool, a Gen AI tool, regardless of what that tool is in your organization. So part of any risk assessment, I think these are kind of some key questions that we would recommend you consider. So for example, what controls are in place to ensure generative AI tools cannot expose my corporate data to third parties? So exactly, it's the data security access control elements that Brenda was just talking about. So how do I make sure that my data doesn't get put into a third party's model, or gets output somewhere that it shouldn't? So how do I stop that? Or do I have any controls to prevent that? And we'll talk a little bit later on about what kind of controls are available to you to do that. The second one is, do you have mature and robust data security and access controls to ensure that the queries only surface data the user should have access to? So this goes back to the core CIA triad of confidentiality, the core principle in information security. What we see a lot in organizations is access creep. So for example, people changing roles as they move throughout the organization without their previous access rights or group membership being removed, so they maintain access to data. And then increasingly, with the rise in collaboration and the capabilities of collaboration, where people are sharing directly to access to files, the silo type approach to storing data is breaking down. So it's quite possible that people can accumulate a huge amount of access to various different files across their like their SharePoint, their OneDrive, their even via sharing in email and Teams. So you can get a lot of extra access. So when these AI tools run, typically they run in the user context. So they're going to be able to surface all that information that the user can. So if your data security and access controls aren't strong, well, then you increase the risk that the AI tool will be able to access or data that it shouldn't. Monitoring controls in place to ensure queries do not breach any governance, risk and compliance, like regulatory requirements, like what I mentioned already around, say, privacy or other regulations. If you're medical, for example, in the US, you could be under something like HIPAA or other regulatory specific requirements, or NDA from if you're in maybe different kind of verticals. You need to understand what's going on inside these queries and outputs. So can you monitor what queries are being asked, and can you monitor what data is being created into those outputs? And again, this is an area that a lot of people don't necessarily have good visibility on yet, or aren't aware that tooling exists for them to do that. And then finally, going back to the prompt engineering type risk, do you have any good security detection or protection controls to ensure prompts can't be used to bypass controls or expose data? So can you detect unusual prompt activity, people attempting to use prompts to look for specific types of sensitive data, like files with passwords in them, or maybe specific projects or financial data or something like that you might want to have extra security controls on, or unusual prompt activity, maybe out of hours. Do you see an awful lot of prompts looking for data outside normal working hours from an account that's never done that before? So maybe there's evidence that there's an insider risk or their account has been compromised. So I think these are 4 good questions to ask yourselves before you implement any Gen AI tools in your organization. Brenda, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that, or any additional kind of questions that you think people should consider?
Yeah, I think the regulations are really important because there are many industries that they must follow specific regulations. So you have tools to understand how you are positioning yourself in terms of those regulations. And because Copilot uses the user context, and it means that if the user has access to the data, and if the user can exfiltrate that data in some way, Copilot will have access as well. And it makes it much easier to find it. So we have to be very careful in terms of how are our risks and secure posture positioning to make sure that Copilot will have just access to the data that the user can have access. So it's really a delicate conversation that we have to have before anything related to AI.
Yep, I think that's a good segue. Because we've been talking here about kind of the general questions around any type of AI tools, but there's some more specifically getting into the Copilot, because that's really what we wanted to get into today, because I think Copilot is going to be something that a lot of organizations are going to be looking at as a core Gen AI tool, because it is so powerful, and because so much data and data processing and operations happen within the Microsoft 365 space. So we're going to talk some more a bit specifically here about risks and challenges around Copilot, and then we'll get into how you might mitigate those. So, I think, Brenda, you hit on this already. So, and the key element is the Copilot runs in the user's context, i.e. it can access everything the user can. And I think the bit that I've underlined here is that even if you don't know you can, so this goes back to that access creep, those access controls. If you don't have a good management of data access and data security within your environment, then Copilot will be able to, be a catalyst for any risk you might have around access control. A secondary one is that Copilot doesn't reach out to the web by default. So but this can be enabled on a user level. So, initially which I think is a good control, Copilot doesn't reach out to the web, but if you turn it on, it's then able to reach out to third-party sources, to the web. And, the element that Brenda spoke about quite a lot earlier on around the graph connectors. So Copilot will be able to use a lot of those graph connectors, potentially third-party plugins and other third-party data sources, that the user has access to and be able to pull data in from those as well. So that's something that needs to be considered when you're looking at your risk assessments. I think this is a really powerful capability of Copilot, but obviously it will come with some risks, and you need to consider, you know, is there any of those plugins, external sources that maybe I want to be more careful and control that Copilot can access to. I don't know, is there anything else you want to add on that, Brenda?
Yeah, in terms of the web, we have to make sure that when you are querying data from the web, it gives you context. So it doesn't have the same example that you gave about the New York law. It's not bringing you false information. So you can separate between the data that's from your company, the data that you trust, that your people have worked, and the people that's just bringing from the web. And you have to train your users to understand the difference of that and the impact as well.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, there will be some training involved. Copilot is supposed to be easy to use, but like anything else, yeah, you definitely need to train people on the risks and how to use it properly. That's a very good point. And then, you know, Copilot does not understand sensitivity, copyright, or confidentiality of data unless you've implemented something like sensitivity labels. So as I mentioned earlier on, you know, out of the box, none of these tools understand what sensitivity, copyright, or confidentiality of data is, but Copilot does have capability to do so if you have implemented data classification sensitivity labels. So we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on, but it is a powerful capability within the Microsoft 365 tooling that allows you to tag your data with what's called a sensitivity label, which gives data classification, and Copilot does understand those, and that does enable you to put some controls in place around the surfacing of sensitive data in Copilot prompts. And then another one is the semantic index. So again, I think Brenda has kind of touched on this already, but there are capabilities to, you know, control what Copilot can surface. By default, it will look at everything. But, you know, like the search layer that Brenda described earlier, which, you know, you could use use controls to prevent certain SharePoint sites, for example, from being indexed in the overall search. You can use the same controls with Copilot. So by default, it will search everywhere. And again, you need to be aware of that. But, you know, as a mitigation, it is possible to, you know, prevent certain sites from being indexed and searched and used by Copilot for creating its content. So if you have a very sensitive site, SharePoint site, that you're very worried that you do not want under any circumstances to show up in Copilot queries, you can do that. Anything else you want to say around that, Brenda?
Yeah. So after talking about so many risks and challenges, I know that there are many people that will be like, oh geez, I'm not turning Copilot on. And this last point is really important to make, because it's not that Copilot has to be implemented after these sensitive labels have been implemented, because you can use this third point where will be looking only to a specific site points where the Copilot will access to give kind of access to Copilot to your users. And this helps the company to kind of deploy Copilot and deploy the security tools in parallel, because you want to make sure that you have your champions that will be testing Copilot, that will be using Copilot. So when Copilot is ready to roll out to the whole organization, they will have more understanding of how to prompt. And this is the last point that we can use to make sure that we have this parallel deployment as well. Is really, okay, Copilot will look at the first only to specific SharePoints and so on. So we will discuss a little bit more, but just so people do not get scared, there are solutions for all those risks and challenges.
Yep, that's an excellent point, and that's really what we will get into now, and what we really want to talk about today is, you know, there's more so, I think, than most of the other AI tools out there. Copilot specifically comes with a lot of different tools within the Microsoft Defender Purview kind of stack, as well as the Entra side around the access controls, etc., that can make it a much safer option to use as an AI tool within your organization. We've had one question in actually, Brenda, you might be able to answer this one. So we asked us, does Copilot flag the source if web search is enabled, i.e. if the results come back, does it show whether they've come from an internal source or a web source?
Yes, you will see all the results from the web, all the results from your company, and you will also have a link for the source of that reference.
Yep.
So you can check. And this is important to note because Copilot is bringing you the information, but it's up to you to make sure that this is relevant to your search.
Yeah, it is. That's very important. And I think maybe, Brenda, you might talk a little bit this shared responsibility model as we get into the kind of the kind of how we mitigate against these risks. I think this is a good way of understanding, the responsibility between Microsoft and the customers. So you might talk us through this.
Yeah, and this is really to address the security and compliance concerns related to generative AI. So it's really crucial to grasp the shared responsibility model so you can understand what falls into Microsoft, what falls in your organization. And the shared responsibility model delineates the shared responsibility between the service provider, so Microsoft, and the organization that's using the AI, so your organization. So the areas of responsibility between Microsoft and organizations varies, okay? And it's really based on the type of the AI. So if you think in terms of the AI for IS and PaaS, for example, organizations will have more responsibilities on the control, but with SaaS models, SaaS-based applications like the Copilots, Microsoft, in the case of Copilot, we assume the majority of the responsibility for the app and the infrastructure controls, while the organizations have the responsibility of the AI usage itself. So from Microsoft's side, we built the foundational security controls to make Microsoft Copilot enterprise-ready. So it's all those principles that we adopted and how we can make sure that it's following that. For example, Microsoft has strict access controls to customer data. As I said, your data is your data, and it won't be shared to other tenants. It will not train the LLM model and so on. So all the data is encrypted, as I said, and also is protected by industry standards. On the other hand, okay, organizations, they have the responsibility to configure the access controls to determine who have access to Copilot and who has access to which data, and also how they can block risk access. So it's not only talking about data security, but also talking about identity security, kind of the whole environment as well. So you have also to, as an organization, to protect and govern the data that's entered in and created by AI. So it's really making sure that you are training the employee to ensure that users are using the Copilot in a responsible way, and this is really crucial.
Yep. I think, thank you very much, Brenda. It's nice and clear to make people understand the boundaries of their responsibility and what Microsoft will do for them. So I think this is a really useful diagram to summarize that. So just conscious of time, we're going to try and run through a couple of the slides next. We want to get into the recommendations. We do have a couple more questions coming in, but we'll try and address those at the end. So we want to just pop these all up on the screen. So there's kind of three key recommendations that we would want to talk about today, right? So the first is to be able to detect sensitive data in prompts and outputs. So this is going back to being able to make sure that, sensitive data is not turning up in prompts and outputs. And the key to doing this is using the data classification and sensitive information detection within the Purview suite in Microsoft. So some of this can be done and there are some questions around licensing. We have a little slide on that later on. Some of this can be done in E3, some of it can be more powerfully done in E5. But basically, there's tooling there that allows you to detect specific types of sensitive information across the tenant, and that includes within the queries and prompt outputs of Copilot. So that can be based on PCI, it can be based on a number of different detection type. So you can customize that to your own requirements. So if you have a specific product code or specific types of data that you do not want turning up in prompts or outputs, then you could create detection rules for that, and then correspondingly create DLP rules around it. And then also data classification, which is something I'm going to show shortly around the sensitivity labels piece, is really powerful here. So the query can recognize that the data is coming from a classified source, and it will then either not allow that data to come into the output, or when it brings the data into the output, it will automatically classify the output to the same level of classification as the source. So there's no downgrade in terms of the classification and there are any corresponding controls. And then the communication compliance tool is really powerful. I'll kind of show you a little screenshot of what that looks like later on as well, to enable you to understand, to analyze prompts, to see whether people are trying to access data that they shouldn't. The second key one here is around stopping that sensitive data being returned in prompts is around the control. So the first is around detection. This is around prevention. So using information protection, using DLP to prevent the data. So for example, using sensitivity labels to encrypt your highly sensitive data would prevent that data being able to be surfaced or returned in prompts. User access controls are really important. So for example, to stop access creep, having something like group access reviews, so that the group owners are regularly prompted to say, these are the members who have access to this site or access to this team. Are these all relevant? Do you need to remove people who don't need access anymore? And this can be particularly important when you have guests in your tenant. So doing things like inactive guest reviews or removing guests from groups on a regular basis can ensure that those access controls are up to date and there's no access creep going on. And then finally, the regulatory requirements piece, again, Brenda touched on this a couple of times earlier. So using some of the tooling like eDiscovery to find and remove Copilot data that's no longer relevant or shouldn't be there, or to maybe meet a requirement around a DSAR or a freedom of information request, and using data lifecycle management or retention. So you can enforce retention rules on Copilot data. So Copilot prompts live in a basically hidden part of your Exchange environment. So your prompt history, for example, you can actually put in retention rules to get rid of those, and also implement retention labeling on the content that gets created. So, to help remove stale or unnecessary content if people are doing drafting or brainstorming, in case those files have sensitive information in them. So you can use all of these different tools to ensure that Copilot doesn't introduce any additional risks in your organization. So you can, basically detect the attempts to use Copilot in an incorrect way, or people using it in an unsafe way. If you're comfortable that detection is working to a very high standard, you can then implement prevention controls. And then obviously you've got the compliance layer as well to be able to come in and understand what's going on in my environment with prompts. How are people using prompts? And am I removing any data that's no longer relevant or is not needed anymore? So I want to just jump out here for a second and show you very quickly what that might look like in terms of the labeling. So I have here two Word files. This one here is a file containing confidential information, and you can hopefully see on screen there the little confidential badge at the top, and I've the tip has popped up here to explain what confidential means, and then there's some data in that file. And then I have a blank new file here, which is got you can see here by default has a general sensitivity label, which is blue and has had no controls in place over it. So if I go into this file and click on the Copilot icon, obviously demo gods hopefully being nice here. So I say use file, and I'm going to use Copilot demo file. Perfect. So I'm going to use this file to generate a summary put that file here in a table. Okay, so I'm going to let this do its little bit of work. Now, hopefully you can all see what's happened here. We've had a banner pop up straight away that the sensitivity of this document has changed because it's brought in content from a confidential document. So it's explained here straight away what's happened. You can see here the badge at the top of the screen has changed from general to confidential to show that this file has now been labeled as confidential because it has pulled in confidential data from another file. So straight away, I can guarantee that the controls and the classification of the source document have flowed through into the new document. And this is really the power of sensitivity labels and data classification within a organization. And I think it's one of the things that makes Copilot, something that is very, has a lot more control over potentially than other Gen AI solutions that you would have to maybe build third-party solutions to do all of this for. So hopefully that's nice and clear and shows how quickly and easily that is. And that would work if I was creating a PowerPoint or an Excel or any of the other different Copilot enabled tools that are available in your Microsoft tenant. That if you bring in the sensitivity, and you can typically, if you're set up your labels properly, you wouldn't be able to downgrade. So, changing the sensitivity to downgrade, I could do this because I've got some admin rights, but a normal user wouldn't be able to do that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the power of the sensitivity labels. And then just to show the communication compliance piece. So this is communication compliance in Purview. We're looking to make sure that people aren't trying to find out about a project that is very secret. Maybe it's for maybe a merger or some kind of other thing, but we don't want to be able to give people access to something that they shouldn't have access to. So you can kind of see over here on the right, I'll make that a little bit bigger. So Adele here has asked for a summary of Project Dragon and when it will be announced, but Copilot has come back and said, I apologize, but I can't summarize this topic as it pertains to a confidential project. So the details and announcement date of this project are not publicly disclosed at this time. So obviously you can see this is really powerful to ensure that people within an organization aren't able to find out information that they shouldn't have access to. And the last thing I'd just like to show you is around the kind of e-discovery or the audit element. So if you need to find out what prompts a user was entering, if you were doing a bit of an investigation for unusual activity or suspected insider risk, you can go into the audit log in Purview and you can use the activity filter interacted with Copilot. And then you can do your normal searches then to find out what was happening with that user or a group of users or on specific dates, etc. So again, really, really powerful. Okay, so the key takeaways from today are access control defines the boundaries. So you need to review that before deploying and make sure your access control is in a good place. And I think this is an area that a lot of people may not realize is messier than it looks. Access creep is a major problem. Collaboration and sharing can expose more data than you would expect. And the data connectors and plugins is really key, reviewing those and potentially doing what Brenda was suggesting and limiting the visibility until you're ready to maybe deploy something like sensitivity labels. Can be a really strong initial control, so you can start rolling out Copilot without having to wait maybe for a data classification project to be complete. As I've just demonstrated, sensitivity labels are really powerful, really useful thing to deploy to ensure that data classification is respected and that people don't get access or generate data that contains information that they shouldn't be displaying. And it's really important that any new content inherits that sensitivity label. And that would also include, I didn't have it in that document, but visual markings like watermarks can be really powerful there, or headers and footers come in there as well. So really, really useful controls that are available within the Purview suite and then on the access control within like kind of Defender, like your group access reviews, etc., to help you protect your data and use Copilot safely. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Brenda, in terms of these kind of key takeaways?
Yeah, because when we talk about the power of data governance and security, people don't realize that it goes even beyond that kind of having your sensitive labels in place. As you just showed, how do I make sure that people are querying and it's not being kind of breaking any compliance? So the Purview suite is what offers you a more comprehensive set of tools. So it's looking at communication compliance, make sure that you're preventing them from querying specifically and asking specific questions and so on. So I think we will discuss a little bit more about the difference of the 3 and 5, of course, conscious of time, but it's important to make sure that you have visibility and you understand what else you can do. Yeah, this is the slide. So in terms of Copilot, okay, so Copilot you can get as an add-on licenses, and you have, of course, the prerequisites, but you can get as an add-on for Office 3, Office 5, and Microsoft 365 E3, E5, and so on. We can share later the links as well. So with the Office, and then it's where you think about the data protection. So with the Office 3, you get really baseline security controls. So this would be multi-factor authenticator and kind of very limited tools to make sure that you are protecting your data, and you will have some audit logging there as well.
Yep.
For some reason, I can hear myself, but you can hear me well, right?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so thank you, Brenda. And I think what I just want to jump on now, just to wrap up, because again, just conscious of time, and I don't want to be taking too much of everyone's time for today. You know, all of what we've spoken about today are things that we can help organizations with to understand. I think the key thing, as Brenda said, is that there are lots of controls you can do at the E3 level without having to go all the way to E5. So we're not saying that you need to have E5 to be able to deploy Copilot safely. And with that in mind, what we've developed here in CWSI as part of our Secure Guard kind of suite of services, and specifically in the data guard space, is a kind of security readiness assessment and operational assessment for Copilot. And essentially that is based over 3 key areas. So before deployment, so this is really looking at people who haven't deployed Copilot yet. We have a set of kind of questions that we'll run through, security questions, some of those I touched on earlier, so to understand the risks and what people are trying to do and make sure they what controls they already have in place. We look at your data connectors, your third-party applications, anything that's plugged into the Graph API. Again, we found organizations don't always have good visibility about what's being done there. It can be different parts of the organization could potentially have implemented those. We look at things like the audit log and e-discovery, you know, make sure they're enabled and that people are aware that they're there, because, you know, a lot of this stuff is you're licensed to look at without maybe realizing that it's available to you. We look at communication compliance. We talk through all these different what's possible with it and what's possible with things like sensitivity labels and retention. And, you know, some of the benefits of looking at maybe a default sensitivity label at a SharePoint site, or looking at controls like Brenda mentioned of excluding or you know, blacklisting or blocklisting specifically sensitive areas and only allowing Copilot to surface less sensitive areas initially. We then help the customers actually configure the various controls and roll out Copilot safely, because, you know, a lot of these things are easy to do. So there are you know, how you decide which data connectors you want to enable and whether you turn them on or off, which plugins you want to enable like web search and whether you want to turn that on or off, and walking people through the onboarding wizard so you understand the decisions that you're making when it's asking you these questions in terms of you know, there's a number of different questions in the wizard relating to privacy and relating to configuring these plugins in different areas. We can explain the implications of those decisions and talk customers through the best choice decisions. And then finally, once you've rolled out deployments, there's the compliance and operational elements. So, you know, we will help you create controls to check for things like high volume prompt generation, so unusual activity. As I mentioned, people running a large amount of prompts, maybe out of hours, or you know, a lot of prompts suddenly happening from an account that's never been done before. That could indicate someone unusual or compromised account. We run a bunch of pre-designed playbooks, which is kind of red teaming around those prompt engineering risks that we spoke about earlier on. So I am, you know, if I was a rogue admin, what could I do? I'm someone in HR and I'm trying to access data. You know, what kind of questions might I ask? We have a number of different personas that we use to kind of red team either an insider risk, maybe someone who hasn't been trained properly, or an account that's been compromised. And then we also look at how you align your Copilot controls into, you know, your overall kind of roadmap for things like data security and zero trust. So maybe you start with some of the whitelisting or blacklisting of sites, and then you're planning to roll out something like sensitivity labels and DLP later. We can help you build out that roadmap. So this is a kind of fixed price engagement that we can do with an organization to kind of get through all of these different areas so that you have a plan to adopt Copilot safely in your organization. And yeah, we'd really like to talk to you about that. So there's an opportunity to claim a one-to-one consultation with myself or a member of my team to discuss these in more detail. And I'll leave that QR code up on the screen for anyone to use, or you can just reach out to any of our sales teams or to myself directly to discuss further. So again, just conscious we're slightly over time. I'd really like to thank Brenda in particular for her insights and contribution today. Brenda, it's been great having you on the webinar, and I thank you personally very much for your support today.
Thank you, Paul, for inviting me, and have a good day. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Brenda. And to everyone who stayed online, you know, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully that was useful, and really look forward to talking to you, you know, individually about your maybe requirements. We had a lot of questions come in that we didn't get a chance to answer, but we would really like to talk to you further. So if you want to reach out to us, we can maybe do that in a one-to-one conversation in the near future. So thank you very much for your time, everyone, and have a good day.